Coming thick and fast at you. Welcome back to Drinks Coach. Hi. If you saw the last two, you saw that I recommended 10 of actually an extensive number of Tesco's finest wines, which they showed to us, the journalist at large, not long ago. And I was very impressed, considering what a giant drinks retailer they are. The price competitiveness and the precision and the quality of some of those wines is as good as I can ever remember it. And I've been in the wine trade for 30 years, tasting Tesco's every year, and I think they're as good now as they've ever been. Having said that, we did Tesco's yesterday, the day before, and we're on to Sainsbury's. Okay, so I hadn't been to press tasting for JS for a long time, and to be fair, they don't show as many products to the journalists prior to Christmas as Tesco does. There are lots of arguments one way or the other for showing lots of wines or few wines. And I generally imagine that what they were showing us were new release taste difference products in general. This one here, I didn't bother checking the price of, which I'm just going to check now. So we've got a handful of wines here, which I really thought really hit the spot. Very specifically, the white wines, we're going to do white wines in this show. It's going to be a nice quick show, and then in the next show I'll do a couple of three reds, I think it is, which I liked, and yes, a very nice new inexpensive Highland single malt, which I think might capture some of your attention. Okay, so hi, I'm Joe Wadsack, the Drinks Coach UK. It's at Drinks Coach UK or lowercase, or at Vinesack, for everything to do with me. Drinks Coach, more to do with this channel, and anything around it. Do hit the bell to get notifications. Please subscribe. We're nearly at 1,000, very close to 1,000 followers. We might have even passed it this week. I haven't checked, which is quite exciting. If it is on 1,000, maybe I'll try and send something to the person that's just most recently subscribed. Four wines, and actually, if you think about Sainsbury's and you think about supermarkets and you think about what they're famous for, so bringing, I think, value to the public, you would hardly have expected me to come up with such a classic range of wines. But the wines that I liked this year were this, which is, I wouldn't say it's that conventional, but it's old school. It's Crémant d'Alsace. It's a sparkling wine from the Alsace in the northeast of France, on the border of Germany. I really like this wine this year. It's quite a delicious wine and really Christmassy. Then we've got a bottle of Pouilly Fumé. Surely, if you're interested in wine at all, you've probably come across Pouilly Fumé before. Not to be confused with Pouilly Fuissé, which comes from the south of Burgundy. It is an oak Chardonnay. Pouilly Fumé is from the central Loire, dead centre of France, and is or isn't an oaked Sauvignon Blanc. Sometimes there's wood, sometimes there isn't. Then we've got a wine from a grape variety which was seen as really workmanlike, and it was one of the most common aperitifs in France to have a little drop of creme de cassis from Dijon in Burgundy, where the best blackcurrants in France come from, and they'd make this concentrated creme liqueur out of blackcurrant and add an acidic dry white to it, which is called Aligoté. And Aligoté is the other grape variety which they plant extensively around the satellites of Burgundy. Now, most people, just to keep things simple, are told that Burgundy is just Chardonnay and Pinot Noir. Those are the only two varieties. Well, of course, that's never true. First of all, Burgundy has Gamay as well as Pinot Noir. Those are two reds. And on the right-hand side, there's actually even a Burgundian appellation for Sauvignon called Sauvignon de Saint-Brie. And Bouzeron and Bourgogne Aligoté grow Aligoté. But I think it's because it wasn't seen as one of the prestigious wines. It wasn't really talked about when people were talking about wine back in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. This wine's a really good one and comes from a top producer, a negociant that owns some very, very nice estates. Was it Antonin Rodet, Jacques Prieur, made by a lady called Anne-Laure Hernet. Sort of conjures up pictures of a lady fagging it in the Rover's Return on Coronation Street. No, she's really quite a sophisticated academic and glamorous with it, but one of the best winemakers in Burgundy. One of the most powerful people, in fact, there now with the amount of wine she makes. Then we've got a wine here which everyone's heard of, probably the most famous white wine in the world, Chablis. Now, I've been criticising the whole white Burgundy trope for about a year and a half, 2 years. I mean, I think I must have mentioned it when I was doing the drinks coach before. I've certainly entrenched my ideas further, saying that now Chardonnay from Burgundy is so laughably expensive that I really don't want anything to do with it. Which then, surprise, surprise, I'm showing you a wine from a supermarket, which is exactly that. But I think it's an exception that proves a rule, and that's why it was worth mentioning. Because heaven help you if you're trying to find inexpensive, decent drinking Chablis this Christmas, when obviously Chablis is a classic combo with things like smoked salmon and lobster and all sorts of things, and seafood salads. It's just expensive stuff, and this isn't, and I think it's a very pleasant wine. So we'll start off with the sparkling. This is Crémant d'Alsace. I'm not 100% sure where it's from, but I imagine it's one of the co-ops. The co-ops are really, even the private owned brand wines come from co-ops or are made in co-ops like Hunevere and Vicovere. And because there are lots of very, very small producers in the Alsace, so the only way to make wines of any decent quantity and decent consistency is for them all band together in hundreds or maybe 200, even 300 different growers, and get one winemaker and one winemaking facility and produce a large lot of something that they can actually grow as a brand. So this is a Crémant d'Alsace. Taste the difference. Sainsbury's. It's a very smart label. I like it. It's kind of a bronzed sort of puce label. Puce? I don't know really. But it looks very smart. And Crémant d'Alsace, like the wines, tends to not always be bone dry. It can be bone dry, but commonly it isn't, because the grapes get very, very ripe. It's a drought district, and because it's droughty there, the grapes ripen very, very fast at the end of their life before they're picked. So this wine, although it tastes dry, it's about as dry as your everyday supermarket Prosecco. We're looking at about 20 grams here, but this tastes drier than Prosecco does at 20 grams because it's got more acidity, it's crisper. The sparkling wine sort of grapes which you use in Alsace are almost entirely Pinot Blanc and Riesling. Some Pinot Gris is used. Silvaner, which is a grape variety which I think is woefully underappreciated, has lots of acidity, and I would have thought would make some very, very nice sparkling wine. And there are people even in England who have made sparkling wine out of Silvaner. But it's illegal in Alsace. They use, this one's about 80% Pinot Gris, I think. Sorry, Pinot Blanc, and about 20% the other Riesling, I think. Anyway, let's open it. I like drinking fizz out of large glasses. It's a wine, just got bubbles in. Doesn't need to be persecuted into a thin, tiny glass. It's quite a high exposure today. Hope it looks all right at home. Why do I like this wine so much? Well, because it's got more acidity and it's got more residual sugar, so it's demi-sec effectively. The wine doesn't taste sweet in any way. It just tastes really well rounded and really, really well put together. And it's warm and cuddly. It tastes of winter. You know, winter wants things which are a little bit more textured, a little bit thicker. And the addition of residual sugar, or the remaining sugar that's left in the wine after it's been finished fermenting, it provides texture to the wine. It actually thickens the liquid, so the bubbles are more lazy, they go more slowly, you end up with a creamier texture in the mouth. All these things are winemaking techniques, which, you know, people think that, you know, winemaking techniques are only about making a wine taste better, but you can make a wine look better, you can make a wine feel better in the mouth. It's quite a varied lot, the winemaker. So taste of Pinot Blanc. Although it's got residual sugar in it, it doesn't taste overripe. These grapes have been picked nice and fresh. I don't know what the alcohol level will be on this wine. It's 12%, so it's champagne. It's got some tartness to it, a crabapple edge to it, like Japanese pears. It's got this crunch and this little hit of tannin, which I rather like Perry pears. Lovely and creamy. It's very satisfying, very well balanced, beautifully made. And they still set you back 13 quid. This is the point I'm making. I'm coming back to it. I thought this wine is not only very good, and I actually spent my own money on buying one before the press tasting. But when I came to taste it again at the press tasting, I realised what amazing value it is. At 13 quid, you know, there's a lot of interesting wine in there. And because it's less acidic than champagne or English sparkling wine, but it has that kind of mouthfeel and a bit of residual sugar, it's fantastic with things that most wines just don't go with. If you're looking for a fizz to go with gravlax, Swedish marinated salmon and dill sauce, and that sweet and sour senap mustard sauce, here's your buddy. This is the one to do. I think this would be lovely with sushi as well. Be lovely with like prawns, prawn cocktail maybe if you're doing that as a starter. Need something I think sometimes with a bit of residual sugar, a bit looser, and this works really well. Nice big mouthful. Okay, right. Lovely. Moving on. Taste the difference. Fumé. This is made by a producer that I'm not 100% familiar with. Producer by Carve. It's carved at Pouilly sur Loire, so it's made with the Carve Cooperative. Sainsbury's has always had a very good relationship with brokers and wine searchers, if you like, winemakers in the Loire. I'm not sure if Charles Sidney is still helping them out, but he always made sure that Sainsbury's had fantastic Loire wines, and I was always very impressed by them. If he's still doing the job, that might explain many things. If he's not, then the buyers clearly are doing a good job themselves. This is a 2021. If you think that Sauvignon Blanc from South Africa, this Christmas will be 2023 already. New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc is 23. 22 is the last vintage, although it's 6 months on, from Europe. Most Sauvignon Blanc is drunk relatively young, but Fumé and Sancerre, it's kind of like its alter ego, both different sides of the same river. It really doesn't show its best until it's a couple of years in, until the brightness and the sharpness that you get from New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc, which is like a neon light, calms down, and you end up with more of a bright. It's bright, but it's gentle. It's like thousands of candles rather than a spotlight. Do you get me? And this wine has got that, what I like to call Pouilly flow. It's kind of a slow jam Sauvignon Blanc. You can hear some R&B in the background. Lovely smell of pears, a little hint of asparagus, a little hint of gooseberry, cooked gooseberry actually, sort of a compote. Bit grassy. This is something typical of Sauvignon Blanc. Sauvignon Blanc is a grape variety, produces, or the grape produces in its cholesterol, this chemical called 2,4-methoxypyrazine. Yeah, easy for you to say, which gives greenness its flavour. Green peppers, grassiness, chili, asparagus, they all have 2,4-methoxypyrazine in, which actually means that if you've got a wine that has that in there, like this, it's fantastic with foods that also do. So if you've got a glass of this with a tomato salad or a basil salad or with fresh asparagus, works beautifully because you're matching like with like. 2021 wasn't a cold vintage, it was pretty warm. This wine's big. Very generous in the mouth. And like I said, it's a year old now. So it's tasting more, how would I describe, more French, right? I'm just having a look to see where I was. Yeah, so Sancerre, Fumé, I think, you know, if you're buying a decent, well-known, branded example from any other supermarket, indeed, you're probably looking at north of £16, I would say. So to have a taste of difference, Fumé, which is convincing like this at £13.50, pardon me, bubbles from the other wine. I think that's a good crack, and it's a decent wine. So there you go. And it's just more playable. It's better with food. It might not be the most dazzling Sauvignon Blanc to drink on its own, but I would never buy Fumé to drink on its own. I'd be opening a bottle of Fumé if I've got a really beautiful piece of creamy Saint-Maur goat's cheese or something like that, or crottin de Chavignon, which are the little round pucks that they have in the Loire, which are only 10 to 12 days old, 10 to 20 days old. Goat's cheese with this is absolutely smashing. Can you imagine a hot bit of sourdough toast, a bit of cold goat's cheese out of the affinage, out of the fridge, whatever, straight onto your toast so it starts to melt a bit, and a glass of that, maybe in the morning, maybe before Boxing Day, I don't know, with the sun shining outside but cold. I think that's a lovely combination of senses and flavours. Okay, right. Halfway through. Taking quite a long time over it, but I'm enjoying this. I hope I'm not being boring. 2022 Bourgogne Aligoté from Anne Hernet. Anne-Laure Hernet, should I say. Label's quite groovy. But thinking that Aligoté is a kind of like an also-ran grape variety, people have discovered that if you treat it with kid gloves and it's old vines and you have it in the same quality of soil that these beautiful Chardonnays from across Burgundy are grown in, you can produce a wine of sublime texture. It reminds me a bit of a grape variety in the south of the Rhone called Clairette. Confusing, but Clairette and Claret, and they all mean different things in different places. But Clairette is a grape variety, one of the grape varieties in the Rhone, amongst other things. And it has this fluffiness. When you drink the wine, it's sort of, when you put your head on a pillow, a really nice goose down pillow, and you can feel the pillow before you get any weight purchase. It's kind of caress. You put your head on the pillow and softens, and then it cradles your head. But that bit between you touching your Egyptian cotton and your head stopping, that fluffiness, that body, is something that when you drink these wines, I feel almost it's like that when you're drinking it, that your tongue hits the wine before you feel the flavour. Does that make any sense? No, I'm sorry if it doesn't, but buy a bottle, tell me what you think. But this is Aligoté from a lovely vintage, 2022, lovely and crisp, concentrated. There we go. Ooh. So, as I mentioned, it was always seen as a workaday grape variety and doesn't have so much noble character of its own, where Sauvignon Blanc is very obvious, and Chardonnay in its own way has a presence that you can just tell is Chardonnay if you're looking hard enough. Aligoté's almost anonymous in that sense. When you smell it, you smell the minerals. I smell chalk in the ground. I smell stones. I smell old, cool walls next to a bonfire. And when you taste it, it's all about the mouthfeel, baby. It's all that creaminess. It's got just the right amount of acidity here. Sort of tingle of... Do you know what the acidity is? The acidity tastes exactly like a Christmas easy peeler. You know how when you eat easy peeler, tangerines, clementines, whatever they are, I don't know what varieties, or even a mandarin, they're citrus fruits which feel somehow diluted, but they're not. It's just how they taste. They have a watery coolness to them. Well, that's Aligoté. And this is going to be quite happy in a glass with some creme de cassis. I have no doubt about that if you want to do old school. But the wine is appreciably better than that, and it's made at Antonin Rodet, which are a really fantastic negociant in Burgundy. Don't really know what to say, but it's a kind of white wine that you can use any day of Christmas and New Year. If you need something refreshing, if you want just an anonymous wine to drink on its own, if you've got people that like dry wines and people that like off-dry wines, it kind of fits everything. It's the ultimate premium wedding wine, I would say. Well, which brings us on to our last wine of this lineup before we call it a day and then do tomorrow's show. This is from J. Moreau. I don't know if you can see it on there. And J. Moreau Fils and Louis Moreau. Fils, is it Fils? I don't know. The Moreau family own a sizable chunk of the whole of Chablis. Big business, very, very famous Chablis family. Maybe the most famous name after, let's say, I don't know, Fèvre or something. Or there are names, but Moreau is one of the most famous of them all. Defay, for example. So this is Chablis Vieilles Vignes 2020. I've mentioned this many times before on previous shows, but Vieilles Vignes means old vines. In Chablis, they don't even mention Vieilles Vignes on the label if the vines are 45 years old. And that would be considered very old vine if it was in South Africa or Australia. So if it says Vieilles Vignes, you can bet your bottom dollar that the actual vines themselves are probably, at a guess, 60 years plus. And what happens then is the vine gets older, it's gnarly, very gnarly and very, very thick trunked. It's survived 60 years of ghastly frost and hail and God knows what, because Chablis is not a place that you would naturally want to plant grapes. It's just not. If it's lasted this long, there's a degree of protection behind it, and rather than producing like boughs of beautiful grapes, you're probably getting a handful of bunches of grapes, maybe 6 bunches of grapes off a big vine, which is nothing, or maybe even less. And because there are so few bunches, the chi, the natural energy in the plant is focused to far fewer grapes. So each individual grape has got more power, more precious, more dazzling, more concentrated. So this isn't a Chablis Premier Cru. It doesn't say that. It doesn't have a what we call a lieu dit, a region, or an area, or a vineyard that it comes from. I imagine it's coming from old vines that have been picked in parcels and put together. These guys know what they're doing. G. Moreau have been making Chablis since 1814. All these beautiful bottles. What else do I need to say about this? Yes, it's 2020. 2020 was, can't you remember how boiling hot it was in 2020? That was the lockdown year where we all nearly died at home for various reasons. But it was very hot there and also all over Europe. It was one of the hottest vintages in Bordeaux for many years. But it was consistently sunny for a long period rather than having spikes of heat. And that meant that it was very good, probably for red grapes. I mean, in regions which don't normally get enough sun to ripen grapes properly, like Sancerre, produced beautiful red wines in 2020. This is 12.5% alcohol, so it's not gushing, it's not overripe. They didn't pick the grapes late, they just picked them beautifully suntanned and bronzé. So let's sum up. We've got an old vine Chablis made by a traditional producer that's been making this stuff for well over 200 years now, and it's not a Premier Cru. And when I mentioned at the beginning, when we started this, I did say that buying really good quality, inexpensive Chablis is virtually impossible now. Even basic Premier Cru wines cost £21-22. Anyway, this is an old vine. Taste the difference. 2020, 17 quid. It's not cheap, but that's money. I think that's totally fair. If you're getting anything special out of Chablis, which hasn't been swept off the floor for less than 15 quid, then you're doing well. I think £17 for this is spot on. Now, what's wonderful about this wine from a purely nerd point of view is this wine is Chablis through and through. It's just classic. Chablis, people describe Chablis as being charpenté or carpentered, like structured, or charnu, which means chiseled, because it's grown in this extraordinary soil called Kimmeridge chalk, which is tiny little oyster shells, which when that part of Chablis was actually a part of the sea many hundreds of millions of years ago, obviously all these shells died and created this amazingly thick layer of chalk. And chalk is one of the rarest soils in the world, so rare to find. And the chalkiness gives all Chablis a characteristic, a Chablis DNA, that when the wine's a very cool climate and very cool years and they've got high acid, then wines taste naturally minerally and sharp and so forth. But you can't really see what the Chablis soil and the Chablis environment gives to a wine until you pick a vintage like this, which is very, very warm, almost too warm to make white wine. But because of that chalky, toothsome, desiccating density in the mouth, it kind of draws the moisture out of your tongues and your teeth and your gums. Despite the fact being almost tropically ripe, you're still getting that shape, that kind of chiseled, very chalky feeling, despite the fact it's an ample wine. It's as ripe as a cool climate Australian wine would be. Okay, so let's have a look at this. No, straight away it's like pineapple husks and a bit of apricot. There's it's been aged on its lees, typically like Muscadet sur Lie, which you may have heard far off to the west of Burgundy. But Muscadet and Chablis famously, in order to give them more body, they tend not to have much oak aging, if any, because it gets in the way of this characteristic that we've been talking about, which people pay for. It's got some, what I call mealiness. It smells a bit like porridge, a little bit like, because I love them, cold baked beans, but I don't want to put anybody off. It's just gobfuls of juicy, creamy fruit, almost like melon juice. And then, just it comes up behind you and just gives it a little bit of rub, a little grip. It's just fighting on the way down. It's grabbing on and holding on just for a bit longer, which is, I think, the thing that makes Chablis Chablis. I mean, this wine not only would go with lobster because Chablis goes with lobster, the big sweet protein meat of something quite special like that, or crab, let's say, or prawns. Let's cut cloth accordingly. We are in the shit in this country at the moment. But this wine has enough texture to go with rich proteinous sweet meat like scallops that have been pan fried or something special, something treaty for Christmas. But also that dryness and that chiseled minerality cleanses the palate for the next mouthful, which makes this wine almost uniquely gastronomic and useful with food. So there we go. We have Pinot Blanc from the Alsace, probably made by Carb. I wish I'd checked it. About 13 quid, not even. Then we've got a delicious Pouilly Fumé for 13.50. I get a sense that there might have been some barrel fermenting or some aging in some wood there. I'm not sure how much is there, but there's a tiny hint that the wine's been softened and broadened out by the use of oak barriques, which is in its favour. But it makes it, again, really foody, wonderful with goat's cheese, wonderful with seafood. Then we've got the Aligoté, which is your everyman wine. Again, not a cheap wine to buy. I think it's 13 or 14 quid if I remember. It's £14. So when I looked at it first time, I went, 14 quid. But then the more I drink it, the more I enjoy it. Then £17. Suddenly looks extremely good value for money right at the end. But there you go. You couldn't have a more classic lineup. I thought you were probably expecting me to come out with some new grape variety from China and a few interesting bottles of wine from Eastern Europe and maybe a Greek wine, maybe a I don't know, some Australian stuff, whatever, which is what I'd expect from companies like Sainsbury. But in this case, there's a real love for the olds and the classics, and here we go. So next show, I'll show you 3 stunning red wines from Sainsbury's and a really cracking and amazingly inexpensive Highland malt whiskey. See you next time.